Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the book talk today. Wow, I was amazed by the number of people who are interested in this book talk. Thank you very much. Today we have our author of the book that you see here, right? Silver Screen and Golden Dreams, a social history of Burmese cinema, right, by Jane Ferguson, who is sitting here, right? As some of you may know already, Jane Ferguson is an associate professor in anthropology and Southeast Asian history at the Australian National University. Her research interests, right, cover many areas, right, from air transportation, anthropology, social and cultural anthropology, Asian cultural studies, historical studies. And I remember one time we have a dinner and Jen's just going up into the stage, jamming session, right? Playing guitar and singing a song, right? So that is Jen that I never know of. But later on, I got to know that Jen's also sing theory, right? Social science theory. Yeah, the first book that I have got hold of Jane's writing is Repossessing Shan Land, Myanmar, Thailand, and a Nation State Differ. She writes so many articles, right, in international journal, right, which you can also learn later. But today focus will be on this book, right? What inspired her in order to search and write and study more about a social history of Burmese cinema. We also have today a diverse group of discussants, right? Starting from Myat, Chiang Mai Bureau Chief of uh, Democratic Voice of Burma, and also the co-founder of Human Rights, Human Dignity Documentary Film Festival. We also have Htin Ko Ko Gyi, who have just been released from prisons in 2022. He can join us today via Zoom, I think, or from the text that he prepared. And we also have.
I'm going to be his nakado. I'll be his spirit medium.
Okay, okay. Htin Ko Ko Gyi is an artist, poet, educator, and filmmakers, and also co-founder of Human Rights, Humanity Documentary Film Festival. We also have Hein Aung, anthropologist, author, editor of the Myanmar Cultural Research Society Journal. And also we have Gustaaf Houtman, anthropologist and editor of the journal Anthropology Today. And veteran journalist Bertil Lintner, who will join us via Zoom. I have been knowing Lintner during my time as a journalist back in 2004. And Bertil Lintner is also Burmese readers, authors of many books about Myanmar and Myanmar Burma political situations. My name is Mukdawan Sakboon, and I am a lecturer here at the Faculty of Social Science, Department of Social Science and Sustainable and Development. No? And we are thankful to Faculty of Social Science, which provide us with the meeting room today, the Center for Research and Academic Services, and also RCSD, Regional Center for Social Science and Sustainable Development, and the Department of Social Science and Development. Without further ado, Jane will give a talk for 30 minutes, and then each discussion will have 10 minutes. And then we will reserve the 30 minutes at the last for our Q&A. Without further ado, Jane.
Thank you so much, Ajahn Mukdawan. I'm really delighted to see all of you here and to see the interest in this topic. And I would mostly like to do a bit of an overview of what the book is about and kind of my personal journey for why I'm doing this topic, because actually there are some other film experts here, whether in name or also just in hobby. So in addition to the discussants, which I'm looking forward to, We're also going to have a very informal discussant wine, lepe wine or beer wine at Sutsanan after the pub is open at about 5 p.m. So if you're not filled with information here, you can unwind and enjoy some more chats about Burmese movies over a tall, cool glass of whatever you choose. So about this book, okay, it's the social history of Burmese cinema, and the scope of the book is the film industry from 1920 to 1980. And based on release statistics, I've calculated there were about 2,600 films that were released to cinemas in Burma, made by Burmese film companies. So part of the challenge is figuring out how to approach such a vast subject and still have some detail and passion for the history and what each film and what stories they told, but also to summarize the political conditions. I mean, like Ajahn Mukdawan mentioned, I'm an anthropologist, and that has something to do with how I became interested in the film as a topic. And also, rather than doing a film studies approach, looking at the texts themselves, by looking at film as a form of social history or as a lens or as a window to look at social history, it's understanding that film is both a technologically sophisticated form of storytelling. Film is also, it's a work of art, but it's also a capitalist commodity. So it's impossible to ignore all three dimensions when we're talking about social history here. And just for thinking of one more way to think about film, there's a famous film critic called Roger Ebert, and he once said, if you look at a film that millions of people love, you will find something profound, no matter how silly the film may seem. So what can we learn by looking at the films that millions of Burmese people have loved over the years? So part of this, we have to start with a bit of a stereotype here about why is it that there's so little academic work on Burmese film. Part of it has to do with stereotypes, thinking of, and these are all quotations from academic works about Burma or Myanmar, that it's referred to as a hermit state, isolated, hermetically sealed, frozen in time, cut off from the outside world. You know, it's like this bubble that's somehow not on this planet almost. But this stereotype, because of that, it creates an impression that, okay, we know it's a country of 54 million people who would probably surely give us evidence that would disagree with this characteristic, but it still serves to frame academic discourse about the country. And in the book, in the introduction, I have to confront this stereotype. You know, how come this is the first English language academic book about Burmese cinema? And the cinema has been around since 1920. We've had plenty of time to write books about cinema. But part of it has to do with this stereotype, or that it tends to be political science approaches to studying the state or political problems that dominate both stereotypes, but also if you calculate the number of books written about Myanmar over the past several decades, especially from the socialist era on, you see books that focus on political problems or state-based analyses of what's going on in Burma or Myanmar. And then on the other hand, there's also people who do religious studies scholars or religious studies or Buddhism. So I would I encapsulate this approach as the soldiers or monks approach to Burma studies. And these ends up being the kind of topics that scholarly organizations, that theses end up being churned out about these issues, and then also that government research grants will be willing to fund research about that. And so, you know, thinking about how that affects discourse about it, it perpetuates that stereotype. And in some cases, people that are doing state-based approaches might say, well, why are you looking at pop culture? That's just entertainment. That's not important. Some people might have that impression. I mean, obviously, I've spent a lot of time trying to fight against that stereotype by doing that. But there is an important thing to say about the social history of Burmese cinema social history, the cinema both reflects dominant values about a society, but it also influences society in a way. So you can look at cinema and you can incorporate ideas about the state, and you can learn ideas about what popular culture is, and you can learn about the political economy in ways that you wouldn't necessarily learn if you're just focusing on the state or you're just focusing on religious organizations. So it cuts across all of these. So how did I get interested in this? I didn't plan to study cinema when I started my dissertation fieldwork 20 years ago. Wow. In a Shan village of people that were affiliated with the Shan United Revolutionary Army. Yeah, we're having this. So yeah, that dog is named Ailam. We don't have Aishao or Ailug also in the picture. But doing fieldwork in this Shan village, I started to notice that these Shan people, even though they had been soldiers against the Burmese military, they still had Burmese novels in their collections. They would sing Burmese popular songs, and they would also tell me stories about how they used to go to the movies. They'd go to the movies at the cinemas in Taungji or in Mandalay, or they would attend outdoor cinemas in Mungpan, where they'd cordon off a section of the marketplace and then show these movies. And this was also the era of the VCD. So this was before widespread internet connection. So people would watch movies, Burmese dramas, because they could only receive the Thai television signal at the time. And then when I would go to renew my visa, get the visa run stamp at Mesai Takilek, there was this shop called Emetyoa that sold VCDs. So increasingly, my research contacts, they said, oh, okay, you're going to go to Tachilek. Okay, can you buy me the latest drama of Tong Endrapo? I want to watch a Lu Min film. I was the one who was buying all these VCDs for them or film magazines. And then it became an important part of my research because then I was learning about the cinema through the reminiscences of my field research contacts. And then also by acquiring these CDs, I got to find out about what aspects of pop culture they wanted to keep up with. And if you're curious, I have an article about watching a Burmese drama with Shan villagers. It's about the Tu'uti Tota, the only son drama, and it's an analysis of that. And then after discovering all of this interest in Burmese popular culture, then when I went to Yangon, I started to do more formal interviews with film insiders and visiting the Film History Museum, and also drinking beer and playing guitar and singing songs with movie insiders. But this was useful for tracking the industry perspective from its participants in Myanmar and other folks. And visiting the Film History Museum, I thought this was interesting. It was in 2000, well, one of my many visits, but Myanmar Times decided to say I was a foreign visitor, just checking out. You're not supposed to touch the display, but they were taking the photo. It's like, no, hold the camera like you're filming. Okay, I'll go along with it. But as part of my visits to Myanmar, every time I was accumulating more books for my collection. I brought a few for show and tell, but old film magazines that I was able to buy on the used market, especially from our friends from Pansodan, 37th Street, Amyente, the late dear friend Japanji, who was a terrific contact for a lot of Japanese researchers to help find and locate books. And so this was useful for patching together the history of Burmese cinema, because I've already said that this is the first English language one, but this is not to say there isn't a lot of discourse about Burmese cinema. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of books about the topic written in Burmese. There's so many theses, there's film studies experts, there's a film history museum, there's a film association. There's been such a tremendous volume, even though it hasn't always been systematically organized. And that's something I go into in the book, is thinking about, okay, when you do a research project, how do you get the data for what you're going to write about? But then, how is my work different in certain ways? Well, first of all, a lot of these film history books, the older ones that were published, they would have had to go through the socialist era censor board in order to be published. There are certain quirks to thinking about, well, every researcher comes in with their own cultural baggage or the stereotypes they might have, and then I come into it coming from a different lens, from having an experience in the Shan village, but then also because my goal is not to explain or talk about the film industry to other Burmese people, it's also to translate it to people who know nothing about Burmese cinema. Like, for example, I was talking to a Thai contact, and they even said, "Oh, Pama mi papion la." Like, they didn't even know there was a film industry in Burma. So again, there's an active translation going on here. I'm just going to summarize two differences from my approach to cinema, or it's also a summary or a critique of the film discourse that's in the Burmese language, again, in summary here. So first of all, in order to organize the information, the film history or the discourse in film in Burma, they tend to release these anniversary edition books. So they categorize the films according to the years that they came out. So it's the first 25 years are considered the silver anniversary book. The second 25 years, so 1920 to 1945, then 1945 to 1970. So that becomes the golden age or the golden anniversary book, and then 1970 to 1995. And so the books are systematically organized to talk about film according to those eras. But in my work, I decided to periodize or to organize it according to political regimes. So I focused on just three eras, or break it into three eras: the colonial period, or that has other meanings too. The three eras of Burmese cinema. So looking at the colonial period, the parliamentary democracy era, and then the socialist era. And I chose to look at film from 1920 to 1980, also because by 1980, Burma started to have the Burmese Broadcasting Service. They started to have television. So, and the video revolution, I really wanted to focus on the black and white era as kind of, and then, 2,600 films is enough to work with to begin with. I don't need to talk about film up until the present. So I kind of arbitrarily stopped at 1980. In addition to the differentiation, because they don't necessarily talk in the Burmese film history books about these periods as, the Silver Age is the first 25 years, Golden Age, et cetera, or they'll talk about before the war and after the war, with World War II being the big rupture for the film industry. And aside from the periodization, I started to notice too a lot of different film events. Like, this is one that is honoring the looking at that, you might think it's an SPDC era conference talking about International Women's Month. Okay, a few of you got that. But it's actually the film committee talking about celebrating the political martyrs of Burmese independence. And so there's often this tendency for film history books written in the independence or the socialist era to look back at colonial era filmmakers as people who are, fighting back against the colonial tide to fight for Burmese cultural authenticity. And they saw them as almost soldiers for the nation, trying to make films that would be, that would give Burmese people their own culture as opposed to imperialism. Never is it mentioned that the early filmmakers were actually rich because of the colonial economy, or that they might have been making films in order to make a profit. I mean, that economic dimension, it tends to be absent in socialist era writing about the colonial period in film. And then this other aspect is that you'll see that the great artists, and even look at this, this like Myanmar Yoshin Seyaji Mya I Asoa Me Mya. So the directions from the great Seyaji, the great masters of Burmese film, you might get the idea that film was only made by these guys, that there wasn't anybody else involved, let alone the idea that film as a commercial enterprise is supported by consumer tastes as well. You know, a film won't make a profit unless people go to see it. But okay, back to this system of venerating, you know, and paying homage to these film masters, you know, exemplifies this sort of masculine-centered history. In other words, some of the film history is shoehorned in order to fit the ideological contours of the history of the nation state, the post-colonial nation state. And so, you know, I offer some critique about this, but it's also, these are the sources of where I'm, you know, learning about the history of the industry. And you'll see, like, okay, you know, Aung is the great father of Burmese cinema. He's seen as, you know, making the first film. And Boykotta, the film in the still from the upper left, is talking about, you know, the Rangoon University students movement. Utokji are actually Upu as well. It just says in the caption from the film history book that he was the earliest, the first director of a Burmese film. And I thought, when I first read that, I thought that was just how he looks. And then I realized also, he also, in the first film, he played the bad guy. And they didn't mention that in the caption. So now I don't feel so bad about, you know, my my impressions. And finally, you know, Chitshui, like Chitshui, they had a lot of, they called them diving stars. That would be a stunt or an action star. And there's some quirks, like, for example, Chitshui, his name is the origin for Josui. He was later Chitsui, and they would often name the stars after the subsequent stars. So it's the equivalent of having a, I don't know, Lady Madonna Gaga as the name of the stars, because they would always take the name to ride on the popularity of them. So also another point that I get into is that cinema is the heir to indigenous forms of entertainment. So many Jataka stories, many folk tales, stories of Yazawin, or, you know, or stories of the Buddha became animated on the stage, from the Ramayana as well. And so in the early days, it was often sometimes theater stars who would break into film acting. And also importantly, I think I get into this there's 2 chapters about music and its relationship to the film industry, because first of all, silent films in Burma are never, ever, ever silent. They're always very rowdy. First of all, they would, the cinema hall owner or the cinema producer, the film producer, they would hire a live band to accompany the movie. And the kind of music they would hire did not depend on where the movie was from. It would depend on the ethnic character of the audiences. So for the Westerners, they would have a, you know, piano accompaniment with a Western style ensemble. It was a big deal to have violin players from Goa, because the Goans would have learned how to read Western notation in parish schools. If it was a predominantly Indian audience, they would have Indian style ensembles that would play as part of that. And then when it was Burmese audiences watching the film, even if it was a Western movie like Charlie Chaplin, they would still have a saimwang. They would have Burmese style court music to accompany it. And sometimes with an anyen, or they'd have a sandia, the Burmese style piano. But because the tuning is not the heptaponic scale for the piano, that they would often retune the pianos when they were switching audiences or switching films. So actually, it created a lot of metal fatigue, a lot of stretch on the strings. And so, well, on the one hand, it gave the piano tuners jobs, but it was an amazing thing realizing that they'd have the cinema hall piano, but then retuning it every time. depending on who was there. And this was an aspect of the social history of the cinema that I was really interested in, rather than just focusing on the films themselves. I read the autobiography of Sagaing Lashwe about his experiences as a piano player in the cinema hall. And one amazing story he used to tell, so many stories, but there were the equivalent of Zorro in early Burmese silent film. It was this character named Bo Wa, this swashbuckling character with a big sword. And instead of a big like Z for marking his territory, he would do a walong, like make a W sign. And for the film, for the band, the cinema hall band, there was one particular drummer. His name was Abdullah, and very much like Rocky Horror Picture Show style, like shouting up at the screen. If the bad guys were coming along and Bo Wa's running along, he would shout, "Watch out, Bo Wa!" And then the bad guys would grab him, and everybody would love that. Or he would do this sort of when he beat up the bad guys, like "Ta ta, bye bye." This idea of shouting out to the screen. It's not because people think they're going to really influence what's happening in the movie. They're just entertaining themselves and their friends around them. And for Abdullah, the drummer, because he was in the band, he had seen the movie so many times, he could really perfect his timing, for his comic timing, for when to say something funny that would entertain the audiences. How long should I go for 10 more minutes? Would that be all right? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm distracting myself a little bit. It happens. Other colonial era pictures. And so the transition to sound on film. So there's three, again, oh wow, all these threes. I really like this. I didn't intend to make such a pointed political statement. But so three kinds of relationships between sound and film. The first is the silent film, the Asante. So this is where you have the band and there's no sound produced from the film. On the other hand, there's sound on disc, where they would have a pre-recorded disc and then have to play it along with the projector. So you'd have the moving picture and you'd have the sound separately. And then finally, there's the Athan Twet, the talkie, where the sound is recorded directly onto the film. And you start to see a change in acting styles when you have Athan Twet, when you have talkies. You don't have the big exaggerations of the stunt days, like, "Oh, I love you," because they're able to rely more on the spoken word rather than on gestures. And one of the earliest talkies, I mean, not earliest, talkies silent films continued to about 1956. There was still a market for them, partly because the cinema hall bands were so entertaining. They were able to keep their jobs. And then also the cinema hall band jokers, the Lupiet, they would still do the translations for foreign films because it was much more expensive to do dubbing, let alone subtitles. But the Lupiet, very much like the Thai kind of Pak, the people who would do the simultaneous translations are incredibly funny because they would not necessarily translate literally. But anyway, this film, Soundoshin, is a recreation of the story of the Nat Ushinji, but originally from in Mon historical discourse. And in the beginning of the movie, they even list the Mon names of the places beside the Bama names of them, but they use the term Talang instead of Bon, which is not a good word to use this day. But also, instead of using a Mon-style harp, a mijang, they use a Burmese-style arched harp. And part of the Ushinji, the story of Ushinji, that particular ghost or nat, it's because of that story that a lot of Navy men or a lot of people who work on ships in Myanmar don't want to carry a harp because there were some, things didn't go well. He was sacrificed. It's a tragedy. He dies and he becomes a kind of ghost. So to sum that up. But I was also interested in the way in which this narrative, it Bamarizes a Mon story. because who was controlling access to film, who had the access to be able to make these narratives. And also there was A1 or Myanmar Aswe films. There was a character actor named Saita who he was always a faithful servant. He was always a minor character. He was in dozens of movies, but he never got a starring role. And I wonder if that had something to do with the fact that they didn't want to have a Shan man being the handsome lead or something like that. You can surmise, interpret it in multiple ways. But this was something that came up when I was talking to Shan friends about the history of Myanmar cinema. It was almost always the first thing a Shan person would tell me when I said I was writing a book about Burmese cinema. They'd say, why do they put the bad guys in Shan pants? I guess it's easier to jump over fences or something like that, but it creates, I mean, whenever you have a popular culture representation of a politically marginal group, that representation is always going to have political meaning, regardless. And so this is where the work of the audience and the interpreter comes in. So up until 1937, all of the cinema halls were foreign owned. So either by Indians, mostly Gujaratis. Madan cinemas had about 2/3 of Burmese cinemas. Chinese owned or Western owned. The first Burmese owned cinema was in 1937, but there were dozens of Burmese production companies. So that was the relationship for the popular film industry at the time. So moving on to the parliamentary democracy period, now that I've spent 20 minutes on 20 years. When the country got independence, it also amalgamated the frontier areas, and also it meant that the independent government could support the national film industry directly. So they did things like, it gave cash boosts in order to support the film industry. They required that every cinema throughout the country, if they were going to have a license to operate, they had to show Burmese-made films for 60 days out of the year. So that automatically guaranteed the Burmese film industry some of their some business or some income stream. And also a part of it in the film magazines that I was reading right at independence, they said that they had to be careful about thinking about making movies that fostered a union spirit. They didn't want to make films that would necessarily look down, or they had to be especially careful about Yaza Win or King's history and those kinds of films, because they wanted to make sure not to cause rifts or not to make things that were too controversial. This is also because, at independence, the Communist Party of Burma arguably had the most political power. There were already seeds sowing of a separation. There was a communist insurrection, and then later the invasion of the Kuomintang and the buildup in the 1950s. The Kuomintang starts to become the enemy of the Burmese soldier hero. So again, the film industry is not something that's entertaining and aside from the political context. It's very much embedded and inflects it. And we can think about the role that Burmese movies had in informing the general public about what was going on politically or what, far off regions were like. And the reason I put this one, so this is the flower blossoming on a mountaintop, Shanghai Mary Myat. She was one of the best known, most gorgeous singers of the 1950s. She was a screen actress. She's ethnic Shan, and her story, she had, during World War II, she and her aunt had gone to live in Shanghai because of the war. She was from Namtu in northern Shan state. And while in Shanghai, she studied embroidery and ballroom dancing, as one does. But then she won a beauty contest. She became Miss Shanghai. And so later, at the end of the war, she moved to Rangoon, hoping to get jobs in the cinema. And some of the early directors, I kind of think this isn't true because they said like, oh, you can't be in movies yet because your accent is too far. You know, okay, so, but if it's silent movies, who cares? There's that. But she did get some jobs in the theater and then later broke in and became one of the most popular stars in the 50s. And she died in 1957, but I thought this quotation was really telling, that her shanness is what gives her a light and pure complexion, and the innocence and surprise that she offers, it is a kind of pretty naivete. So it's still like, okay, she's not quite sophisticated like the Bama, but she's not really a hill person because she won Miss Shanghai. So it's almost a kind of cute ethnic minority. So, you know, films do reflect some of these popular ideas about that. I know I've only got how long? 5 minutes. Okay, so anybody like Copy the Chin here? How many movies are copy movies? So there were various movies that were remakes of popular films from Hollywood, from Bollywood, you name it. I think I'll go super fast because I've been distracting myself. This particular movie, Nora Prentice, 1947, Variety magazine called it an overly long melodrama. But in 1953, it was remade into Sholay in Bollywood. And then in 1957, Dr. Aung in Burma. And Yoshinbadeta magazine, they said, the movie is not strictly taken from the others. From the beginning to the end, it has been changed to show Burmese customs, culture, and Burmese life. 5 minutes, right? Okay. It starts with a tango. Dr. Aung is married and has 2 kids at home, but he likes to spend his time dancing in a nightclub. Mary sees him and asks his friend Charlie, hey, look at that guy. Is he a bachelor? Charlie lies and says he's a bachelor. They start an affair, and soon Dr. Aung is staying out later and later and coming back to his faithful wife and kids, like, oh, Daddy, you're out so late. What's going on? By day, Dr. Aung has he's a cardiologist. He has a heart clinic in downtown Rangoon. And this is Nora Prentice up in the upper left. That is Sholay, and that's Aung So even if you're in San Francisco, in Bombay, or in Rangoon, they all have Venetian blinds. And cardiologists all smoke. So there's a coincidence. Mary gets into a traffic accident. Surprise, ends up in Dr. Aung clinic. Actually, it's after this incident, because, you know, if somebody squeezes your knee like that, next thing is just an affair. So Mary gets involved. And then, oopsie daisy, they meet Aung at the park with his kids. Mary breaks off the affair. She goes to Myat. She joins another theater troupe. Dr. Aung does not want to break off the affair. He's in love with Mary. So he creates the sinister plan where he's going to switch his body with that of a recently deceased patient. And this is one of the advantages of owning your own cardiology clinic, because you have access to corpses. And he found this corpse that was the same weight and the same height as him. So he puts the corpse in the car, pushes it over the ravine, puts gasoline, petrol on it, lights it on fire, pushes it into the ravine. So everybody thinks Dr. Aung is dead. He runs off to Myat and he joins Mary. And it's not happily ever after. He becomes consumed with guilt. He's so frightened that Mary is going to cheat on him that he goes and makes a scene and he attacks the owner of the theater company. And then he drives off like crazy and then crashes his own car into a ravine. The one in the bottom right, that's Toonces the cat that could drive a car. It's not related to any of those remakes, but I just wondered if they borrowed the scene from Dr. Aung And then the police find a monogrammed pen of Dr. Aung in the crashed car. I mean, his face is terribly disfigured. He isn't dead. And then they bring him back to Rangoon to stand trial for killing Dr. Aung but he refuses to speak, and he is sentenced to death because of that. But what does the film have that's different from the other two? These all look quite the same. the tango scene. The star, Dr. Aung Jo-u, is played by Maung Maung Ta, who is an accomplished ballroom dancer. So they want to showcase his skills. They want to show that he's doing that and he's accomplished in that dimension. So anyway, things change because of the Burmese way to socialism. Cinemas become nationalized. They change the films both ideologically and they change the economy of it. The government actually realized that they didn't know how to make a good film, so they let private entrepreneurs still make films. New censor board, new censor guidelines. This image is interesting. You have these people sitting like, let's stop and take a rest on the Burmese way to socialism. And, you know, what's appropriate for the Burmese way to socialism? Well, she's wearing what you call this a bambi pinchet, so ass-hugging trousers, and he's singing guitar, playing along. One more remake film, Nimwa'ate, based on The Parent Trap. But what's different about it, it's basically the same plot, except rather than having the twins meet each other at summer camp, they meet each other on a school trip, where as audience members, we get to surreptitiously witness about how these great advances in hydropower and hydrology are helping extend the Burmese way to socialism to the hinterlands. Or we go to visit the oil drilling fields at Chao to see how its oil drilling is powering the industrial economy, and then also finding out lots of pahututa about how far away Pagan is from Nyau and the various dimensions in which kings found it. In other words, this is something they add to the remake films that didn't exist in the parliamentary democracy period, or what I say is that they were adding special sprinkles of mono-socialist glutamate to make the films more appetizing to the censor board. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. I look forward to discussion.
Yeah, I just like the part that Jen's talking about the silent movie in Myanmar has never been silent, right? And I just wonder if among the audience there are half foreigner and half local people, right? What kinds of music will be played then? Okay, so without further ado, I think we want to invite the first discussion, Myat. Yeah. Myat. Okay, sorry for that pronunciation. Yes, you have about 10 minutes.
I would like to admit that I haven't read the whole book in English. This is the first copy I got it, but I read some of the chapters written in Burmese because I'm taking part in her book writing in Burmese. So her Burmese is already quite good, except a few words we used to add. No, I'm not gonna tell. I'm not gonna tell that for sure. Only very little things. Okay. Okay, so I find it so interesting in her Burmese writing, actually, of this book, Burmese translation. I found three unique things in her writing. Number one is storytelling style. This is very unique from the academic book I have been reading so far. Why her story writing style is unique? Because she used kind of the anecdote or story of individual to reflect the social history. So that make her writing style unique. So I really love, and then it never get bored for me to read her chapter. So like I also read some of her article in English as well. So whenever I read it, I really find it fascinating to tell the story. How she knows how to attract her audience. But you know, most of the academic article I find me sometimes, even myself writing, I find very boring sometimes. To be honest. Okay. The second thing is in her book. I also just quickly check the reference at the end, bibliography. She used lots of local reference written in Burmese, old books, and etc. And I remember that whenever she come to Myanmar, she always go to the Pansuran book streets and collect old books, and also meet different friends from intellectual community or maybe film industry. So that is why that most of the resource references used by local, local reference from local libraries, also from the interview with the local community. So that also makes this book very unique. So you can, even for me, it's like I was born in socialist time, so I never had any experience about silent film. By reading her books, I know about the taste of the silent films. I only heard from my ancestor, my grand grandparent, etc. But I never seen it for the silent film. So it's also from the resource she collect, she can reflect that the time we haven't reached so far. Because film for me is kind of, in the socialist time especially, film is only the kind of entertainment we can use for our for, how can I say, our relax. Like my father always brought us to the cinema whenever there is a new film coming to our town. So that is a kind of habit of our family. So film is not very far from us. Film is one of the entertainment, very little entertainment things we can use during the socialist time. We don't have any social media like this time. And we also we read books. So books and films are, very few entertainment tools in our time under the socialist time. So these books also reflect that time. Another third unique things of this book is she used kind of very detail and using history of Burma cinema to tell or study social history of Myanmar. So this is also very unique of her book. So that is why I really, admire for the attempt she has been trying so far for 20 years. That's a lot, actually. I asked during my interview with her how many years you spent for this book. So 20 years. Shocked me, actually. It's too long. And then also another thing I like to share with you is 10 minutes or almost 10 minutes. Yeah, stay have time. Okay. My favorite chapters. So one of the first chapter I like is gender theater, chapter 2, because I also read in that Burmese writing in that chapter. She trying to write about the role of women in the film industry in Myanmar. So that is very important. She talk about Burmese screenwriters. She talk about actors, like many actors, and then also women audience. We cannot underestimate the ratio of women audience in Myanmar film industry. That is why Myanmar film industry can stand, and the women consumer market in film industry. That is also women play important role in Myanmar film industry as well. So this is what is missing in so-called Myanmar Motion Picture History Museum. They never talk about women in that museum. So that is why I like that chapter 2, gender theater. Another chapter I like is about chapter 3, sound waves. This is also talking about music used in the Burmese cinema as kind of like musical accompany to the silent film, like you mentioned about. And film, the taste of Burmese audience, actually unique taste of Burmese audience. Burmese audience like to listen to sci-fi, actually. So sometimes they were moved by these music, not only because of the film, also because of the music using in that sci-fi, and also relationship of the band to the action on the screen. So like Shweba, for example, Shweba before he fighting, there is sci-fi, we call it Beimang. It's like the Shweba is going to fight. The audience already know that Shweba is going to fight soon. They were so active in the film. So this is what I heard from my grandmother. I haven't seen that film. So these are the kind of chapter I like because of that chapter really telling us about the time of silent film in Myanmar film industry. Now another chapter I like about is using the film and then the Burma cinema, the way how discrimination like between the Burma majority and ethnic community, and using that metaphor, how Burmese film use that metaphor to kind of even intentionally or without intention, they make that kind of stereotypical concept among the audience. So that is why whenever they see like the in fighting, like she said, we men wearing shambaomi, and also when they use the kind of housemaids, they use some other ethnic women. So something like women, the people has kind of conception that, oh, these are the people, you know, like different from our class, so something like. So that is, you know, showing about the kind of the majority and minority concept of the stereotypical concept influenced by the Burmese film in the, you know, the audience. So these are three particular chapters I like in this book. I have more, but I think I have to read first before I talk more. Then maybe ask some other participants, discussants, and then can share their insight about this book as well. Thank you so much.
So my friend Htin Ko Ko Gyi, he's online from Yangon, but he sent a short letter that he would like me to read aloud. And forgive me if I get a little bit embarrassed here, but it's okay. I'll start. Alongo mingalava lo nokha a set the light body. Jane Ferguson go tu Myanmar sayesiyama Myanmar name nyen lo name pe gimbo tabare dimaro jino le tu go nyen lo be nansa ko bi kyovare. So hello everybody. I'm talking about Nyen because she was given the name Nyen, so that's the same person. Nataunt chao kunipma bedu ye mese pe mu ma mababe jino Nyengo tike yavare. So I met her without being introduced. Gandoji myosin junga sintin kita pyo pye pue teguma Nyengo miempu laipare. Eri nyaga janoga le jano meswe tiyaut ne tu gale tu meswe acho ne eri ma jano tu go bajang tadi ta mi laitale sora tu ha Myanmar tachin toto mya ko lai so neva net chocho so nere. So I wasn't introduced or I was at a concert at Gandoji and with my friend, and I saw her with her friends and singing along to the Burmese songs and having a lot of fun. Well, I'm adding that, sorry. Nautiya anenge achamaro pansodang tawaiga sign to sign ma janoro gaviasia bajisia rwe tainera dong nenha jano do meswe tiao ne yaut lavare. Eri meswega janoro ye nyengo mesa pevare. Eri ma janoga myosin junya ajang pian pyo piaro tu tabotwe chavi yivare. So I told her about that when I met her with some poet friends at Pangsodan, and we had a big laugh. Eri nya ga sakkere janoro niya ye tingejin that Disago yenere achema tishit ne shitwavi. So from that day, we've been friends, or until the time I'm writing this letter, we've been friends for 18 years. Nyen Myanmar naingan ladang jano ne duere. Gita tire Myanmar tachin dwe sore atutapien sai mo tachin dwe so yara go tu imatang tabochare. Jano Chiang Mai yautaya ka tu shine yin tu ye atu tachin dwe light natang chare Genoha Chiang Mai ma Carlos Santana Tichindwe Gita Natang Jinde Solo Tu Light Po Pura Matmi Mare. So we always meet up every time she goes to Myanmar. And when I come to Chiang Mai, when I saw her, I wanted to hear some Carlos Santana music. So she took me to hear it. Jano Nyengo Tiraha, Manuta Veda Pinyashin, Eri Nyenga, Myanmar Yoshin, Lumu Tamay Ajang, Sao Yepo, Tudetana Lotne Jang, Pyora, Jano An Thware, Bene Manuta Veda Pinyashin Ga Yoshin Ajang, Ye Melode, Dabe Me Sham Meswet Dwene, Kimin Yin Niya Gane, Assoc.Prof.Dr. Myanmar Yoshin Sorago, Tu Setwinza, Dwa Yachin, Pitchang, Pyopyare, Natown Le Lau Sakere, Nyenye Bludetana Ha, Ninese Ajo Agu Natown Nisele Mado Sao Pit La Kewavi. So when he knew I was an anthropologist, but when he was surprised to hear that I wanted to do research about Myanmar cinema, and that she had started to do the research about Myanmar cinema from 2004, and now is 2024, so it's been 20 years. Silver screens and golden dreams sora Myanmar lo so yin ngwe yang beka ga ne shwe eme mya bo. Jano ga ro ngwe yang beka ga bo ga shwe eme mya lo be bada pian pianjine. So that's just how he would translate the title into Burmese. It sounds nice in Burmese if I don't. But okay. Name sao go jano mapatya de babu. I haven't read the book yet. Ebook poda beme mapanain de babu. Even though she sent me the ebook, da beme jano thing a jindwet hiao a nit nise lao a chain be through the tana pubi yetare sao depon lego miyara jano Atwet do imatang biti pit yavare gon yuare. So my old friend of so many years, she published this book, and I see the picture, and I want to congratulate her, and it's an honor. Nyenga piore erisa otle tu godaim Beijing dede janogale nyen godaim berale lekhan yujinde Eddie Atwet Jano do Machakin Pien Tue Yame lo Jano Myolimare. So would like to get the book, and I hope that I can see her again not long from now. Alongo Jesutin Jusutin Htin Ko Ko Gyi. So everybody, thanks to all. Htin Ko Ko Gyi. That's all.
So I would like to thank Htin Ko Ko Gyi for sending this letter and in order to support James in her writing of this book. The next discussant, I would like to invite Hein Aung. Sorry for my pronunciations. Okay, thank you. You have 10 minutes.
James ဘာသာပြန်ပေးမှာလား Okay မြန်မာလိုပဲပြောလိုက်မယ် Okay No
He's asked me to interpret also. So.
Okay ကျွန်တော်မြန်မာလိုပဲဆွေးနွေးလိုက်ပါမယ် Okay အားလုံးမင်္ဂလာပါကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီ James ရဲ့ဒီ Silver Screens and Golden Dream စာအုပ်ပွဲပေါ့နော်ကျွန်တော်ဒီကိုရောက်ရတဲ့အတွက်အရန်ကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်စကားပြောရတဲ့အတွက်လေးဂုဏ်ယူပါတယ်အဲ့တော့
Oh, hi Jane, I'm happy to be here at your book launch.
ကျွန်တော်တို့ရုပ်ရှင်ဆိုတာကိုကျွန်တော်တို့နားလေတာကတော့ဒီလူတွေရဲ့လူဖွဲ့စည်းရဲ့အတိတ်သမိုင်းကိုအကောင်းဆုံးဖော်ပြနိုင်တဲ့အထောက်အထားတွေလည်းဖြစ်ပါတယ်
I understand that film has provides evidence for our social history.
ဗမာပြည်ရဲ့ရုပ်ရှင်သမိုင်းအကြောင်းကကျွန်တော်တို့ဒါနှစ်တရာအထိရှိလာပါပြီဒါပေမဲ့ဗမာပြည်မှာဒီရုပ်ရှင်ဝေဖန်ရေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့ကိစ္စတွေကတော့အင်မတန်အားနည်းပါသေးတယ်
And that Myanmar has over 100 years of film history and has events within the country.
ဟုတ်ကဲ့ပါကျွန်တော်တို့ငယ်ငယ်တုန်းကဆိုရင်တော့ဒါဒီမဂ္ဂဇင်းပေါ့ရုပ်ရှင်မဂ္ဂဇင်းအဟောင်းတွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ဖတ်ရပြီးဆိုရင်ဒါစိန်ခင်မောင်ကြီးရဲ့ဝေဖန်ရေးတွေကျွန်တော်တို့တွေ့ရတာရှိပါတယ်
And so for a long time, when I was a youth, I would get film magazines or I would read old film magazines and learn about the history through them.
အဲ့တော့ရုပ်ရှင်နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့အတက်ပညာပိုင်းဆိုင်ရာဝေဖန်မှုတွေကိုတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့တွေ့ရတယ်ဇညွန်းနေဒီအလင်းအမှောင်ကိစ္စတွေဒါပေမဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဗမာရုပ်ရှင်တွေနဲ့ဗမာပြည်ကထုတ်လုပ်တဲ့ရုပ်ရှင်တွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့မနုဿဗေဒရှုထောင့်လူမှုဗေဒရှုထောင့်ကနေသုံးသက်ချက်တွေကတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့မတွေ့ရသလောက်ကိုနေပါပါတယ်
So there's lots of books and magazine articles about the history of Burmese cinema, but there hasn't been so much that has done social analysis or gender analysis.
ဗမာပြည်ကရုပ်ရှင်တွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ကြည့်ပြီးပြန်ကြည့်ပြီးပေါ့နော်ပြန်ကြည့်မယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့ပြန်လေးလာမှုတွေလုပ်မယ်ဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့အဓိကအားဖြင့်ဆိုရင်ဒီမပါတဲ့အကြောင်းတွေပေါ့နော်ရုပ်ရှင်တွေထဲမှာမပါတဲ့အကြောင်းတွေကိုတော့ကျွန်တော်ကပိုပြောချင်ပါတယ်
And so, thinking about analysis, he also mentioned there weren't so many anthropology books about film in Burma, but now he wants to go back and look at some of the aspects of film that haven't been noticed as much before.
ဒီဗမာပြည်ရဲ့ရုပ်ရှင်တွေထဲမှာကျွန်တော်တို့အဓိကအားဖြင့်ပေါ့နော်ဒီဘာသာစကားနဲ့ဇာတ်ကြောင်းဖန်တီးမှုကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ study လေ့လာမယ်ဆိုရင်အဓိကတွေ့ရတဲ့အချက်တွေပေါ့နော်အဓိကတွေ့ရတဲ့အချက်တွေမှာဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီကျွန်တော်ရဲ့သုံးသက်ချက်ရဆိုတာလူမျိုးကြီးဝါဒပေါ့နော်လူမျိုးကြီးဝါဒနဲ့ဆက်ဆက်တဲ့အမြင်တွေကိုလည်းကျွန်တော်တို့အများကြီးတွေ့ရပါတယ်
Okay, so looking at topics of Balaye, so religious topics, but then also the idea of Lumyoji Wada or ethnic chauvinism and how it's presented in film.
Okay, နောက်တစ်ခါကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီရုပ်ရှင်တွေကနေဗမာပြည်မှာရှိတဲ့တခြားသောမြန်မာမဟုတ်တဲ့လူမျိုးစုတွေအကြောင်းကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ဘယ်အချက်လက်ကမှခိုင်ခိုင်မာမာသိရနိုင်ဖို့အဆင်မပြေပါဘူး
And then also getting good information about non-Burma people within the Burmese film. It's difficult to find within the film discourse.
ဗမာပြည်ရဲ့ဒီနှစ်တရာတသန်းအတွင်းရုပ်ရှင်တွေထဲမှာဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီပြည်တွင်းစစ်အကြောင်းတွေလူမျိုးရေးဆိုင်ရာဖိနှိပ်စော်ကားမှုတွေပေါ့နော်ဒါမျိုးတွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့တွေ့ရတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့ပြည်တွင်းစစ်အကြောင်းလို့ပြောလိုက်ပြီးဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့မြန်မာဘက်ကနေကြည့်တဲ့ ethnocentric point of view မြန်မာစစ်တပ်ရဲ့အမြင်တွေကဒီရုပ်ရှင်တွေထဲမှာ90%လောက်အထိဖုံးလွှမ်းနေတယ်လို့ကျွန်တော်သုံးသပ်ပါတယ်
And also the aspect that there's been so much, decades of internal conflict within Myanmar, but then within the movie, it tends to be a central point of view rather than, from the marginal groups.
ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီရုပ်ရှင်တွေထဲမှာဆိုရင်ဒီလူမျိုးစုတွေကျွန်တော်တို့ပြည်တွင်းစစ်ကြောင့်လူမျိုးတုံးတက်ဖြတ်မှုကြောင့်ဖိနှိပ်ခံနေရတဲ့အခြေအနေမျိုးတွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်လာပြီးဆိုရင်တခါမှတော့ပို့ထုတ်ညှိုးဆိုမှုမရှိသလောက်ပေါ့နော်ကျွန်တော်တို့အဲ့လိုတွေ့ရပါတယ်
So you haven't seen a film that's historical film about the internal conflict that really gets at it from a critical point of view, from the point of view of the marginalized group.
ပြီးခဲ့တဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီ2019မှာ19နဲ့18မှာယုံတင်ပြခဲ့တဲ့ရုပ်ရှင်တွေကိုကျွန်တော်လေ့လာပြီးသူတည်တနာပြုမှုတချို့ပြုလုပ်ခဲ့ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီထဲမှာဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီရုပ်ရှင်ယုံတင်ပြသခဲ့တဲ့ရုပ်ရှင်တွေရဲ့60%မှာဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့LGBT တွေเนาะဒီကျွန်တော်တို့ disabled တွေနောက်လူမျိုးခြားနောက်ဒီ minority religious minority group တွေအပေါ်မှာခွဲခြားဆက်ဆံတဲ့ရုပ်ရှင်တွေရဲ့ပါဝင်မှုကအင်မတန်များပြားတာကိုလည်းတွေ့ရပါတယ်
But then also, I mean, he'd been doing research about films in 2016 to 2018 and became interested in doing more research and thinking about the topic of LGBT representation or minority representation and the role of film in social change.
ကျွန်တော်ပေါ့အချိန်ကန့်သက်ရှိလို့ကျွန်တော်အပိတ်ကလေးပြောချင်တာတခုကတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီပြီးခဲ့တဲ့2016 18ကာလတွေမှာကျွန်တော်တို့ဗမာပြည်မှာဒါလူမျိုးတုံးတက်ဖြတ်မှုဖြစ်ပွားနေတဲ့အချိန်အတွင်းမှာကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီဗမာရုပ်ရှင်ရဲ့ဒီ academy ပေါ့နော် academy နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့ကိစ္စတွေဆိုအင်မတန်ကျွန်တော်တို့စိတ်ထိခိုက်ဖွယ်ကောင်းတဲ့အခြေအနေတွေနဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ကြုံရတာရှိပါတယ်ဒါလေးပြောပြီးရင်တော့ကျွန်တော်ညီကုန်းချုပ်ပါမယ် James
Yeah, and also like the choices. So I'm adding this that since 1952, Myanmar has had its own film academy award system, and so his study also between 2016, 17, and 18, he was having a look at which films get the attention of the prizes. Yeah.
ဟုတ်ကဲ့ပါကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီအကောင်းဆုံးဥပမာနဲ့ကြည့်မယ်ဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်2016ခုနှစ်မှာကျွန်တော်ဒီဗမာပြည်ရဲ့ဒီပြည်ရင်းစစ်နဲ့ဒီပတ်သက်နေတဲ့ Twilight Over Burma လို့ကားမျိုးကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ယုံတင်ပြသဖို့ရုပ်ရှင်ပေါ့နော်စင်ဆာအဖွဲ့ကနေခွင့်မပြုခဲ့ပါဘူး
So, for example, in 2016, there was a film called Twilight Over Burma, which ended up being censored.
တစ်ဖက်မှာဆိုရင်တော့ကျွန်တော်အဲ့နှစ်မှာပဲလူမျိုးရေးမုန်းတီးမှုတွေအစ္စလမ်ဘာသာဝင်တွေအပါအဝင်လူနည်းစုဘာသာဝင်တွေကိုခွဲခြားနှိမ့်ချဖိနှိပ်ရိုက်ကူးထားတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီအုတ်ကြားမျက်ပေါက်ဆိုတဲ့ရုပ်ရှင်ကတော့ယုံတင်ခွင့်တရားခဲ့ပါတယ်
Yeah, so they didn't have a public screening because it deals with the issues of a minority group. It's about a Shan prince and the way in which he was, ousted by the Burmese military following the Ne Win coup.
ဟုတ်ကဲ့ပါအဲ့2019 Academy ပေါ့နော် Academy ဆုပေးပွဲမှာဆိုရင်စောစောကခွဲခြားနှိမ့်ချမှုတွေအများအပြားပါတယ်ဒီအုတ်ကြားမျက်ပေါက်ဆိုတဲ့ရုပ်ရှင်ကကျွန်တော်တို့ရုပ်ရှင်ဆုတွေ Director ဆုတွေအမျိုးသားဇာတ်ဆောင်ဆုတွေအထိပါကျွန်တော်ရရှိခဲ့ပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ကျွန်တော်အပိတ်ကလေးပြောချင်တာကတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီဗမာရုပ်ရှင်သမိုင်းဗမာရုပ်ရှင်နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်လေ့လာတဲ့အခါမှာဒီလူမှုဗေဒမနုဿဗေဒနဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီပြိပခနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အမြင်တွေနဲ့သုံးသပ်နိုင်ခြင်းမရှိခြင်းဟာမြန်မာရုပ်ရှင်ရဲ့အားနည်းချက်တွေလူမျိုးရေးအမုန်းတရားတွေကိုပို့ပြီးပြန့်နှံ့စေတဲ့လက်နက်တစ်ခုတစ်ဖွဲ့ဖြစ်နေပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်
So also he was paying attention to which films got the award in 2017 as well for the best film, the best director. And which film was that? By Yoshine.
Ocha Nyapa.
Ocha. Oh yeah, yeah. So grass growing between the rocks, but
so
my translation is too literal.
Okay.
So it actually has a negative representation of foreigners and the idea of religious minorities coming in to take over, and that could be an interpretation. But the fact that it won these awards, we can think about it in terms of an anthropological analysis of why is it that they're giving priority or giving honor to this kind of narrative.
ဟုတ်ကဲ့ပါအဲ့တော့ကျွန်တော်ရုပ်ရှင်အကြောင်းပြောရင်တော့အများကြီးပြောစရာရှိပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့ကျွန်တော်ဒီနေ့အတွက်ကတော့ဒီကျွန်တော်တို့ဗမာပြည်ရုပ်ရှင်သမိုင်းဗမာပြည်ရုပ်ရှင်နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့လေ့လာမှုမှာဒါထည့်ဆွက်ပေးတဲ့ Jane တို့ကျေးဇူးတင်ကြောင်းပြောရင်းနဲ့ပဲကျွန်တော်နေကုန်းချုပ်ပါတယ်ကျေးဇူးပါ Jane
He's thanking me for writing the book about this exploration about Burmese film history.
So our next discussant, thank you very much, Hein Aung. Sorry again. Gustaaf Houtman.
Thinking very hard. What aspect will I look at? What aspect will I look at? Because it's such a rich book. There's so many things you can highlight. And I thought, well, maybe Jane's sense of humor is the way to go, which is really that you are always very playful with whatever you witness and see and research. So Jane is more than just a scholar. She's an entertainer, a performer. She plays guitar. She sings and she truly enlivens situations wherever she attends. This is evident also in her choice of titles in her published work. So Shake It Like Elvis and Hijacking Area Studies, Discrete to Excrete in the Concrete Jungle, Women Bike Messengers and Urban Strategies in 3 US cities. So she has the most amazing range of different titles alone, which give you an indication that she's playful with her research material. These are just a few tiny samples, but Jane is forever looking for fresh surprises in her daily encounters, researching one topic after another. She's careful, however, never to make fun of the people she writes about. The situations she describes are humorous, not the people. So one particular situation comes in quite early. So she begins with her preface or the introduction to her book. One of the hallmarks of her humor is she uses clever comparisons and observations. For instance, she humorously likens the structural films to academic books to sandwiches, describing the main content as the sliced bread between two heels of homogelists. And that's a reference to the acknowledgements at the beginning, and then you have the titles at the end of whoever has been part of that. And in a sense, academic books and films have a similar kind of structure. She's making fun, in a sense, of the creation of a book and a film as if it were a sandwich, which I think is fun. This playful analogy sets a light-hearted tone for the whole book and makes the academic discourse more relatable and enjoyable for readers. And I think that was your point too. Feature films usually start with opening credits, of course, and that is where she got this from. Now, she's got humorous acknowledgements. So on page 7 in the acknowledgements, Ferguson writes, "No animals were harmed in the production of this book. I cannot vouch for the safety of vegetables or minerals." This is humorous because it playfully adapts the common film disclaimer about animal safety to the context of writing a book. By extending it to vegetables and minerals, the author creates an absurd image of academic writing being hazardous to inanimate objects, poking fun at the seriousness of academic acknowledgement. She also has an interesting note on naming and transliteration of Burma and Myanmar. On page 11, in the beginning of the book, Ferguson extends Howard Zinn's train metaphor humorously. "I would like to add that it does make a difference whether you choose to shovel coal, switch tracks, or rabbit on about the color of the upholstery." The humor here stems from the unexpected extension of the metaphor, with rabbit on about the color of the upholstery, being a particularly amusing image that contrasts with the weightier topics of historical analysis. She also has a quote from Howard Zinn: "You can't be neutral on a moving train. If you use Burma or Myanmar, you are already implying yourself as either supporting or, whichever term you use, you're actually ending up in a very dangerous area, which is that you cannot just be goody-goody and say, okay, it's Burma, because that has its own implications. You can't be bad and say Myanmar, because that has its own implications. So what do? And the people say Burma, Myanmar, but that's sitting on the fence, right? So I really appreciated that. So what Howard Zinn meant to be on a moving train, Howard Zinn meant that the moving train represents society and history in constant motion and change. Being neutral suggests attempting to not take a side or position on issues. The impossibility of neutrality, Zinn argues that in a world of ongoing change, choosing not to act is itself a form of action that supports the status quo. So there's a call to action. The quote implies that everyone has a responsibility to take charge of the social issues and work towards positive change. And as a critique of objectivity, Zinn challenges the idea that one can be truly neutral in any of these situations. In essence, Zinn is arguing that inaction or claim neutrality in the face of social injustice is effectively supporting the existing power structures and inequalities. So I appreciated that point. Then she has playful footnotes. There's a footnote on page 228 where she says, "If I were to make this into a musical, I would call it Foreign Implants." And she was referring to a dentist involved in Japanese spy networks. And it's funny because it unexpectedly connects dentistry, espionage, and the pun and musical theater. The pun on implants works on multiple levels. Dental implants, implanted spies, created a clever wordplay that lightens a seriously historical topic. The next one, describing the cinema experience. While not overly humorous, the passage on page 18 has a subtle wit in its description of the cinema experience. Where filmmaking gives writers and cues voice to formulate a plot and narrate a story, the collective yet anonymous cinema hall provides audiences a cathartic social space to dream beyond their everyday lives and to share those sentiments with others in the theater. The juxtaposition of the grand idea of dreaming beyond everyday lives with the mundane reality of sitting in a dark room with strangers creates a little gentle irony. On page 63, Ferguson humorously describes audience interaction to demonstrate that silent films were never silent. And at one screening, the audience shouted back, "Boa! Didn't you hear the warning?" And the humor here comes from the audience's playful interaction with the silent film, which actually is very noisy. Filmmakers outsmarting censors. On page 136, Ferguson humorously observes, where filmmakers are smarter than the censors, in the end they are able to say a lot more because of their canny manipulation of story and indirectness. The humor here lies in the subtle suggestion of filmmakers outsmarting censors, presenting a kind of intellectual cat and mouse game. There are many other points, and I won't go into all of them here. I'll summarize a few. There is a sardonic commentary on entrepreneurship during the socialist era. On page 38, Ferguson comments on entrepreneurship in colonial Burma with a touch of irony. Rangoon, she says, was hardly bereft of local entrepreneurs and business people. There was a burgeoning Burmese middle class that used their access to resources and connections to line their own wallets. This wry commentary subtly pokes fun at the self-interest behind economic activity, even in a colonial context. She has a point about women's autonomy. On page 79, Ferguson contrasts women's autonomy with perceptions of their sexuality. Quote, where Burmese women characters do have autonomy, as demonstrated in the very first Burmese film, they are economic actors able to support themselves and their families by working. Women drive cars and run businesses. Women can also be mischievous, daring, and even revolutionary. But when it comes to allure and sexuality, the agency can be nefarious. The sudden shift from positive descriptions to nefarious, a fearfulness of women, highlights the contradictory attitudes towards women in film and society, presented with a touch of irony. There's also a contradiction on historical behavior. On page 108, Ferguson humorously observes the behavior of Burmese delegates. Quote, on their way to socialist utopias, representatives from Burma often visited Western nations so that they could go shopping to stock up on socially necessary consumer goods and souvenirs to give to their friends and families upon returning to Burma. The irony of socialist representatives engaging in capitalist shopping sprees is presented with a light touch, pointing out human nature's ability to reconcile conflicting ideologies. Although I've been referring to Jane's sense of humor, she's never flippant. Her serious concern are evident in her conclusion, which sums up how the atrocities of authoritarian regimes since 1962 have never dampened the Burmese spirit. So she says, movies participate in the history as it is being made, and they serve as a kind of record of what people felt in novel ways. By remembering a past through movies, it offers an important counter-narrative to remembering it through political history, poverty, trauma, or the authoritarian regime that dominates our lives. So, in essence, the Burmese movie is a kind of a Yedo bone, a kind of a Torlanye of its own, where, despite invasive censorship and the prominence of filmmakers among the Burmese prison population, Burmese can at least make a little meaning of the past in their own way and without following the dictates of yet another authoritarian regime. So Jane Ferguson's work exemplifies her embrace of hybridity. Some anthropologists might have avoided discussion of movies that copy plots from American or European films as inauthentic, but Ferguson thrives on hybridity. She loves it. Rather than adhering to the pursuit of authentic narratives, she dives straight into the copied plots and explores how they are modified to suit local tastes. She does not shy away from the copied or adapted plots, but celebrates the creative adaptations that make them uniquely Burmese. This approach broadens our understanding of Burmese cinema and highlights the rich cultural exchanges that define it. Ferguson's playful writing style stands out in academic literature, where formality and detachment often prevail. Her approach aligns with growing academic trend towards more accessible and engaging scholarship. By infusing her rigorous research with wit and humor, Ferguson makes complex topics more approachable and humanizes the subject matter. This style challenges traditional academic writing notions, raising essential questions about how scholars can balance intellectual rigor with reader engagement. In doing so, Ferguson's work may influence future approaches to writing about cinema, Southeast Asian studies, and beyond. potentially opening doors to a broader audience without compromising scholarly integrity.
So then Gustaaf already give a review of the book. Okay, so the next discussion is Bertil Lintner, who is joining with us with Zoom.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes,
me?
but not quite clear.
Okay, I move closer to the. Can you hear me better now?
Yes,
A little bit. Can you speak like closer to
Can you
the
hear me?
mic?
Can you not hear me? That's the main thing.
a little bit louder.
Well, I can't really speak louder than this. There must be. Can you adjust the microphones, maybe?
Okay, it's good now.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody. And well, it is morning here in Sweden, where I am right now. So I know that one shouldn't use the number of likes on social media postings as a yardstick for anything, but I couldn't help notice that the different responses to articles I've written and posted on Facebook. If it is about Burmese politics or something like that, I get 20, 30, sometimes 40 likes, and I think that's good. But when I reviewed Jane's book, and then I posted the announcement for these events, for this, it kept coming and coming and coming. And I don't think it was only because I wrote about something that wasn't only doom and gloom. I first became aware of the importance of movies, movie stars, and cinemas as part of the way of life in Burma some years ago when I was a young one. And I sat and talked to Htin, who I'm sure all of you know who he was. I asked him how he, Htin, the former naval officer Mount Ka, and film director Umotu, managed to persuade Aung San Suu Kyi to appear in public in August 1988. Because I'd heard that there were those three who did just that. Well, Htin said, we knew Aung San Suu Kyi was in town, but we'd seen a picture in the newspaper when she, on the 19th of July, had been to the martyrs' mausoleum in Yangon to pay her respects to her father and the other martyrs. But they knew that she had lived for many years abroad, so they weren't even sure that she could speak Burmese any longer. But the three of them, the three men, they went to see her, and it turned out that her Burmese was excellent. So after a lot of talks back and forth, she, being the daughter of Aung San, felt it was her duty to appear in public. So a huge rally was planned for August the 26th outside the Shwedagon in Yangon, and she agreed to be the main speaker. But the meeting had to be announced, and this was, of course, decades before the internet. So Aung San Suu Kyi was going to do that 2 days before the planned mass rally outside Yangon General Hospital, where victims of the military shootings into crowds of demonstrators were being treated. So Htin told me that they arranged for some cars to come and pick up the Aung San Suu Kyi, along with some female movie actresses. As I was taken aback, I said, movie stars? Why? Well, Htin said, at that time, very few people knew what Aung San Suu Kyi looked like, but everyone would recognize the movie stars. But because of the chaotic situation that prevailed in the streets of Yangon at the time, not all of them made it to Yangon General Hospital. But there was, and there's a famous picture of the event, Aung San Suu Kyi and Mount Ka, the naval officer, former, standing behind her, and beside her, the famous film actress, Do Kintinatun. At that time, a much more familiar face than the main speaker herself. And Htin told me then with a smile that we had to bring Do Kintinatun and some other film actresses to make sure people showed up to listen to Aung San Suu Kyi, what she had to say on that day. And there's, of course, is history. I'm not going to say much about the history of Burmese movie making, because I don't know much about it. But this is an excellent book. There's an excellent book here, which I hope all of you will read. But to me, who's not an expert in movies and movie making in general, it's rather surprising anyway the movies became very popular in Burma, a country which is famous for other and actually somewhat, similar art forms. Puppet theater, of course, and the early movies were not that different from the epics people knew from watching their own traveling subway theater ensembles. And during the colonial days, I believe, movies also played an important role in fostering the cultural awakening that took place at that time. The military, of course, realized the importance of movies, and they were, and so after the 1962 coup, they did everything to control it. Independent movie making saw a brief renaissance during the decade of relative openness in 2011 to 2021. I don't call it a transition to anything because it wasn't. But then following senior general Min Aung Hling's ill-fated coup on February the 1st, 2021, freedom of speech and expression were, of course, curtailed, and critics were silenced. And hardly surprisingly, not only journalists, but also filmmakers were among those arrested, which again goes to show how important those personalities are in the Burmese context. The new junta, the so-called State Administration Council, appears to be aware of the power of the feature films as well as documentaries in Burmese society and the role they always have played, not only now but also in the past. So I think that you, the people of Burma of many nationalities, you have every reason to be proud of your rich cultural heritage. And now there's a book that tells the background of an important aspect of that heritage. And I'm sure it has contributed, that heritage has contributed to shaping your lifestyle today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bertil Lintner. I think that now we have, I'm not sure whether Jane would like to address some of the comments, it's discussing point, or you want to receive some, yeah, okay. So then now we open the floor for questions for those of you who might want to maybe share some of your thoughts and also asking a question.
I have three questions. Is that all right? Okay. Yeah, my first question is I was wondering if there was a shift in the style of Burmese cinema after World War II. For instance, in Western cinema, I think we saw the rise in popularization of the film noir genre. So I'm wondering if there was any kind of similar shifts in the Burmese cinema as well. So that's my first question. My second question is, in general, from your observations of Burmese cinema between the 1920s and 1980s, are there clear target audiences where these films are targeting to in terms of the gender? For example, are they marketing or made for more women or men or people of other genders, for example? And my third question is, it sounds like some of the Burmese films that you also presented were inspired by Hollywood films. And I'm just wondering if there are any instances in the past or even in recent history, recent past, where there are some Western films that were kind of inspired by Burmese film style. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. So in many ways, like, styles and fashions that were global fashions would show up in the Burmese cinema. So, things like you call them gaunglaung baungbi, bell bottoms in the 1970s. You'd start to see the Burmese stars wearing that. In terms of specific genres, like in the 40s and 1950s and 1960s to some extent, University of Southern California Film School was where some of the rich directors would send their sons to go to film school. So they were very much abreast with reading or finding out about the latest styles. And even in the socialist era, because imported films was such a big moneymaker for the government, people were still able to watch the Hollywood films in addition and Bollywood films as well. So in some ways, there are a lot of ways in which Burmese films very much incorporate and riff off of the international styles and the movements. particularly because of the Ne Win coup and the ideological changes to the films and that the increased censorship, it led to a sort of Burmese-style socialist realism. So you wouldn't have any Nats anymore. You wouldn't have, specific kinds of ghost stories that were unique to Burma. So there's always this reinterpretation. In terms of film exports, there haven't been as many film exports. There's the problem with Hollywood coming over and colonizing, or Bollywood, the more powerful industries, as sort of what would you call it, overwhelming the local styles. But like in the Chinese film industry, for example, I happen to have a copy of the Ngaba the Peasant. It was a socialist era novel that was made into a film, and it was dubbed into Chinese, and it became influential to some extent within the Chinese movie making industry as an example of other Asian peasant societies. So there still is some influence going out that way. In terms of target audiences, even from the colonial era, there were way more women audiences as a proportion of the total audience. And sometimes there would be marketing schemes in order to target. They would give door gifts to different audiences. You'd get a penny novel, and they'd give a different gift for the women's audiences or the men's audiences. So to some extent they did. And also looking at the relationship between target audiences and like gender, for example, there were some, and like the film Japan Yintue, the title character Amy-san, who's this Japanese beautiful woman who's a character in the movie, they had Amy-san powder, Amy-san skirts, Amy-san mosquito coils, and well, mosquito coils, I think, don't have gender, but the skirts and the powder, you could tell that they were looking for women consumers in that. So yes, they did segment the market in certain ways.
Any other question? If not yet, I have a question. I remember, Jen, sorry, being a moderator shouldn't prevent me from asking a question. No? Okay, so I follow James when talking about how the film history book, right, discourse, right, trying to periodizing in terms of silver, golden, right? But you also borrow that discourse into the name of the book too, right? But your ways of periodization use categorize colonial, parliamentary, socialist, right? I am interested in doing those different periods, how the motion pictures in the Burmese film depicting the relationship between neighboring countries, like, for example, Thailand.
Well, I chose the periodization scheme because under different political regimes, these were things that affected the industry as a whole, in the sense that, under the colonial period, it was the British organized censor board, and it was the British controlling the economy more or less that framed, to some extent, how they'd get the materials, or, and it's no coincidence that it was because of the British that Burmese film industry and Bollywood, Indian cinema, had a much stronger connection from the very beginning. In terms of the parliamentary democracy period, it also does matter thinking about representations of foreigners, is in terms of who were the friends and who were the enemies that were depicted in, for example, the war films. So by the 1950s, well, there started to be a lot of films that would present the Japanese soldier as the enemy and have a style like that. But by Pillai Miye, a very popular film from the early 1960s, it was the Kuomintang that the Burmese soldiers were fighting against. So even if it's historical fiction or it's a contemporary war drama, that aspect of different countries, it's really clear. And also the film that Yiheng Aung had mentioned, that there's this uncertainty, or there's contemporary films within the past year that want to show a danger of, oh, a Muslim might come, and what about the danger to the religion? So in that way, looking at the tensions in the film, it reflects some of the prejudices of society at large too, and can play a role in perpetuating those prejudices.
Many thanks, James. Fantastic book and a fantastic project. Leading on from that question, and something that you mentioned, and I know in your excellent report, you talked about this, the depiction of the bad guys, the loser, wearing Shan pants and things like that. Could you speak more to other examples of things like that, and the tensions between how much this was the industry itself kind of developing these stereotypes and perpetuating them, or whether there was something more insidious going on, and that it was maybe not the censor, but military intelligence, or some kind of socialist apparatus that was nudging the filmmakers in some ways, or whether it was their choices, that they were perpetuating long-standing stereotypes and myths. Just in other words, to kind of make it more simple, the invisible hand of the military state kind of coming down and trying to dangle things.
Yeah, I mean, actually, all of that happens, and this is the other part that makes studying 2,600 films so complex, is that the industry itself is huge. It's multivocal. There's various levels of involvement. You have script writers, you have directors, you have actors, and then fundamentally, I mean, this is an important contribution from anthropology, is that the symbol is never stable. In other words, the meaning is always reinterpreted according to how the audience sees it and what values they put on the thing that they're seeing. In terms of specifically about, like, say, Burma and other Tayinta relations, two of the chapters are about these genres. There's actually a named genre called Tayinta Yoshin, where there's some Burma directors who really make an effort and want to present ethnic minority groups in a positive sense. But do they get it right? Who decides what's the right way to do it? In terms of top-down manipulation, or what Lepmeji, like controlling the cinema, there, like, after the Ne Win coup, originally the state had wanted to control all phases of production, and so they decided to make their own script. It was called Chimye, and the beloved land, and it was released in 1965. And stars were forced to appear in it. It was sort of like the Achopyu Yoshin, a propaganda film, Achopyu Tachin. Like, lots of times, if a star wants to continue to act, they have to appear in this, or if a rock star wants to continue to appear in public, they have to do one of these propaganda songs. But Chimye did so horribly that the government realized that, oh, okay, maybe we shouldn't try to make film so directly, but they'd still show propaganda reels. There would often be army propaganda reels at the beginning. I mean, why in Thailand do we stand up at the movie theater before it starts? They could still do that, that sort of thing. And as for the stereotypes, I mean, one of the chapters is about the film Shui Sayang, which was a dramatization of the Shan princess, or mythical Shan princess. We don't know if she really existed or not, if it was a made-up story, but Somhon La, and it got censored multiple times. And interestingly, reading about the censorship process, the filmmaker had used pejorative language about Shan areas, and the censor board wanted to contain any possible controversy about it. So they said, no, you can't call it Shan Pine, call it Kamboza instead. So they were actually, and this is the other problem about some of, like, Western film scholars who love democracy, or there's this romanticization of the artist that oh, the artist is always fighting against the evil dictator, this, that, and the other. And it's not always the case. In this one case, it seemed that the censor board was more sensitive about, wanting to make a film less controversial. And also the point about looking at the industry as something that's multivocal is that filmmakers are not automatically progressive. There are plenty that, come up with things that are racist, sexist, homophobic, this, that, and the other. And so, by having the chance to analyze and sort through it, not just as, film as, hooray for art, celebrating the art, there's this connection to societal values at large, and however uncomfortable we may be with some of those values, they exist.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that comes through in your report, that there's quite a few in the modern industry that are doing it voluntarily to be pro-military. And then there's those doing it, with cynical intent, just to make money and to raise profile. So yeah, the multi-causal faction definitely comes in.
Do we have more questions? Because we still have time, which I would like to maybe ask our discussant whether you have some other points that you want to use the remaining times. Yeah, if any one of you, yes, our discussant. Ajahn Bertil Lintner as well.
Sure, I can hear you. I remember actually that after the 88 uprising, one of the most important, one of the things that the new junta at that time, the State Law and Order Restoration Council, produced, one of the first things they did in the propaganda machinery was a movie called Papima. It was about the students who fled to Thailand, how they were mistreated there and being taken advantage and all that. And all the resistance leader was portrayed as monsters, basically. And I don't know what kind of impact that movie had inside the country, but at least in Thailand, where I lived at that time, and still do, and people laughed at it and thought it was hilarious, and it was just no one took it seriously.
That reminds me of a time in the early 2010s. I was visiting a Burmese family in Mandalay, and it was an extended family, so there were kids in the room, and we were watching a VCD of the King Naresuan epic for Thai history, and it was subtitled in Burmese, and so yeah, the kid was old enough to read along, but he wasn't so much interested in the dialogue. But a funny thing happened because there was a scene of Burmese soldiers, 17th century Burmese soldiers, attacking Thailand, and they were just all Thai extras from the film. And then the kid watching the Burmese soldiers, he's like, "Oh, Myanmar sita Thai gong gong dede." He's like amazed that the Burmese soldiers could speak Thai so well.
Bertil's question just made me think, and you were answering about the King Naresuan film. Remember, there was that period in which bilateral relations between Thailand and Myanmar was so bad, in around 2000s. And there were Myanmar historians writing horrible racist things about Ayutthaya, and there was just so much state propaganda. And it was around that time that Bang Rachan came out in Thailand. And was there that kind of counter narrative on the part of the Myanmar film industry? Because there were all these very kind of patriotic, fantastic films that came out around that time. I just remember thinking that Bang Rachan had one of the best movie posters I've ever seen, for that Thai warrior on a bullet. But did the Myanmar film industry make those kind of anti-Thai films as well?
Yeah. At the same time, Lu Min starred in Chansita, so the whole Yazawin, the whole King's genre, and at the same time as Bang Rajan, later on, there was also more and more statues of Bayinnaung and more statues of Naresuan. And my favorite, oh, not favorite, it's the Bayinnaung that's in Tachilek. And then it's right opposite Mesai, where they have Naresuan, and they're like having a staring contest. So, you know, the whole Yazawin genre, and the founding of Naypyidaw with the giant statues. So the, you know, statue building, filmmaking, and its connection to Yazawin, I mean, I think that's very much about, you know, nationalism and nationalist sentiments and enemy making in the 21st century. Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Thank you. I haven't read your book yet, but I just read the chapter 6. I think that when I came here, so not many this time. Okay. So I've just read a little bit about the chapter 6. So it's talk about the ethnic representations in the Burmese cinema. So I saw that you mentioned some like personal history of some like Burmese filmmaker who make Dainda Yoshi like ethnic film. So and they are probably from the mainstream film industry and from the middle class. But I noticed that after 2000, maybe 2010 or 2015, I don't remember exactly. But during that time, we saw that there are so many like new filmmaking education emerged in Burma, and many young ethnic filmmakers, they got chance to be involved in this industry. Maybe not in the mainstream Burmese cinema, but it seems they figure out a way like to get some funds from foreign foundation, or their target audience are not Burmese audience, but maybe foreigner audience. It seems they found a strategy to survive and to be seen. So I think this kind of change is very important because it seems that because we were talk about the censorship, we talk about the propaganda in the mainstream film a lot, but we also need to see the filmmakers agency. It seems there was a very big change during the 10 years before the military coup. So I just wondering why you're not involved this history during the 10 years. Yeah, thank you.
It was this book stops at 1980, but there's another research article that I've written. It's called the 2017 New Video Generation, and it talks specifically about how there have been shifts in the industry since then. So yeah, I'm talking about film production, and the technology is also a lot more expensive to enter. But then once there was you know, VHS or magnetic video production, and then later VCD, partly technology and then partly because of political opening up, that there was more film to be, you know, more people could be involved in the film industry. So I encourage, it's on my academia.edu site if you'd like to read the article about and social issues and video production. I encourage you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, our last
So I will start my question with an example. After 4-5 months after the 2021 coup, most people, mostly young people, start interesting the contemporary and postmodern poet than recent years. So my question is how these situations and this revolutionary era will impact on the cinema and movies for future. So it will be short question, but you have to answer a lot, I think. Thank you.
I mean, absolutely. There's going to be a huge impact. I mean, because I think popular culture both responds what's going on to what's going on in people's everyday lives, but then also it influences in a way too. And so thinking about something as massive and cataclysmic as ongoing war and the military coup, absolutely, that's a huge impact on the political economy. And there's always the way in which there's this disjuncture in the sense that, okay, I said that, you know, pop culture both reflects and it influences, but the way it reflects and the way it influences depends on people's everyday experiences as well. So this point of, you know, how people see gender or ethnicity or class, how it's presented on the screen, like, for example, all of the soap operas that we see in Thailand, it's always these super rich people, you know, and you could say like, well, okay, that doesn't match my experience. So people have direct experiences that others, but this is the point that is useful about anthropology, I think, is that we know that because we're people, we're always creating culture. People are creative, people are clever, people are always coming up with new ideas, but you know, who has the control over the media to spread that culture to others or to create those ideas? There's always going to be that tension there. So, I mean, absolutely, it's going to have a lot of effect, just as every major historical event that affects a lot of people will affect popular culture in one way or another. Yeah.
I observed that when I say I will get the last question from that gentleman, right? I saw the lady raising her hand. We have a few minutes if you want to ask a question. The microphone is over there.
Hello. Thank you so much for having a good time. So like the most curious things for me is that propaganda movies. So you mentioned it earlier. So there are some famous generals, military generals. They are famous director, scriptwriter. So I would like to know that how your analysis also include or cover those areas about them. I really want to know like how they are making the films and like how they experience. And would you have anything to explain about those propaganda movie and their director, scriptwriters, a little bit more? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, one of the people I interviewed back in 2006, Myat, he had been the cameraman for Bawa Thanthia, but then by the early 2000s, as in his words, he was hired by the government and teaching psycho warfare. So I don't specifically focus on propaganda films because the book is organized according to themes of gender, music, ethnicity, and Cold War relation, or the copy film genres. So the propaganda is not the core focus, but more or less looking at how we can understand these categories of changing social identity in Myanmar according to film and film practitioners. So you might, if you're looking for everything about just propaganda, you might be disappointed, but there are plenty of aspects where it reads into, how did the government try to control film, both in terms of the film economy and controlling access by giving people licenses to make film, the censor board, but then also, the economic aspect as well, that if your script gets approved, then you get a license and then you can buy film. So, how that leads to certain topics being off limits and certain topics being safer is more of what I'm looking at as the industry as a whole. Thank you, though.
Okay, so I think that brings our book talk today to the end, but I would like to do some little propaganda um, by doing a hot sale for this book, right? If you buy the book today at this event, you get like 45% discount, right? And that will come to 1,300 baht, right? So thank you very much, everyone, for joining the book talk today. Thank you, the presenters, Jen. อ๋อสแกน QR code ตรงไหนคะให้ใครสแกนอ๋อ okay everyone can you also scan the QR code here in order to take record as attendance.
Is it Bertil? Can you hear me? Bertil, thank you so much for coming. We're gonna. Okay, I can't really hear you, but I wanted to thank you for coming. I'm on a different microphone. Sorry about that. But thank you.
Thank you, Bertil Lintner.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Thank you so much. But this QR code, what about that one? Hmm? There we go.